Good afternoon, everyone. I'm back again. I haven't done an interview actually for a little while, but I'm back with one of my favorite people, one of my idols, actually, Marwa Osman. Welcome.
Habibti, thank you very, very much for having me. And you are actually my idol. I learn a lot from you, and I love everything that you do. And it's just amazing. Thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, bless you. Marwa, can you just, I mean, we were laughing about this yesterday, but can you just explain to people, I think, just as a bit of light relief almost, about what was happening with the time zones in Lebanon? Because I'm quite sure Western
Oh
media
my
hasn't
God.
picked up on
Oh my God.
it.
Oh my God. Every time my people like set the bar low, they find a way to settle even lower. And oh my God, it's such a tragic comedy that it's like usually like you get fed up and you say khalas, I don't care anymore, and I know that the everyone is corrupt, and there's no way to really get together on a table and negotiate and talk about what's best for Lebanon. But then something like this happens and you go like, oh my God, we are creative with all the BS that we can make. I mean, it's usually every year on the same day, which is basically, if I'm not mistaken, March 25th, the night of March 25th, we turn into daylight savings time. So we add 1 hour to our time. I know that this is in some places is ridiculous. No one uses it anymore, but that's not the problem. It's fine. We do it and we're used to it, and it's okay. But then because we don't have a president, two of the remaining higher powers in Lebanon, the speaker and the prime minister, get together for a chat. And thank God there was a video to prove it. There was a video that was leaked showing that they were chatting, and then because of that chat, they decided to not go for the daylight savings time, as if it's only their decision to make, because usually it's the president that makes that decision, and we don't have a president. And if we don't have a president, it should be the entire cabinet, the government, that should make that decision. But apparently, they just got together, and they happen to be both Muslims. So our friendly Christians in the nation were very much, and rightfully, if I may, not happy with it because it is unconstitutional what they did. But what happened is you can say that I don't like it, it's unconstitutional, but then a sewage of racism and Islamophobia and all kinds of ridiculous issues was opened. And then to retaliate to that, the Muslims started their own sewage system of racism and retaliation and Christianophobia, if there's something like that. And it's been a circus since Friday. I mean, oh my God. And because of that circus, you have half of Lebanon, or less than half of Lebanon, decided to go with the daylight savings time. And then the other 70% of Lebanon decided to, no, we're going to stick with it, because the decision was made because supposedly they wanted people to break their fast at 6 p.m. instead of 7 p.m. And we're used to fasting till 9 p.m. I don't know what difference that makes. But anyway, it made a big kerfuffle in the entire nation. And we had now, well, actually, now we have two times. Yesterday was hectic. Yesterday I had 3 back-to-back courses, and in the morning I had to record my show. In the afternoon I had to continue recording my show. But in the third session at the university, I had to cut that session in half to run to get my kids, because the school has a time zone different from mine, but it's only like 10 minutes away. It's
Oh God.
ridiculous, but this is Lebanon. But anyways, because of all the like rhetoric that was said and all the like disapproval of this absurd decision, the cabinet was they convened yesterday and they decided that they're gonna change to daylight savings times tomorrow night. So we still have today and tomorrow of this craziness, and then hopefully we go back to being one nation again. Despite the fact that the racism that was spewed on both
Yeah.
sides is a very bad indication, a very, very bad indication. But I mean, this is us. This has been us since 1860. So I don't know what's going to happen next, but I don't think we're going to be able to drag ourselves lower than this. But if we do, I'm not going to be surprised.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for explaining all of that because I was extremely confused by some of the Facebook posts that were being put out explaining the difference in time zones if you go to
And I
or
didn't say why.
if
I didn't say why the question. Well, I just need to say that the Christians need to know that people need to know why the Christians were disapproving of this, because this is usually something in the hands of the president, and the president in Lebanon is usually, according to tradition and not law, he's usually a Christian. So they were
right.
like, "You have just taken our decision-making process. Oh, thank you. The dollar is 130,000 Lebanese lira. We have no electricity, no internet. I'm speaking to you from my 3G, from my data, not from Wi-Fi, because they are on a strike in the country, because they are rightfully demanding an increase in their salaries, because their salary is now equals like $7 or something.
Mm-mm-mm.
So it's a crazy shit show, excuse my French.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like there are people who don't have food on the tables anymore. We don't have electricity, we don't have internet, we have nothing.
Yeah.
And you're fighting about time. Go
Yeah,
figure. Go figure.
exactly. No, I know. I mean, the economy, I just came back from a brief week in Lebanon, and the economy there is crazy. I mean, it's even crazier than in Syria. I mean, 130,000 to the dollar is just insane. When
Yeah.
I first started coming to Lebanon, what was it, 500, something like that? It was similar to the Syrian rate. I mean, Syrian rate now is hovering around 7,000. But yeah, you know, people. I have a friend of mine who was basically at the previous rate, or the rate of about 3-4 years ago, he was earning 2,000 a month. He's now earning $120 a month because he's paid in Lebanese pounds. You know,
Oh my God.
just for
Yeah.
people to really understand how this
Yeah.
screaming inflation affects
Oh,
people in the
I'm
region.
university assistant professor, Vanessa, at two different universities. I used to make around $4,000 from both universities,
Yeah.
without talking about my work as a broadcaster, just as an assistant professor. But now those 4,000 have dropped to $300.
Yeah, exactly. And very similar
And
situation here.
and
Sorry, go on.
and guess what? The prices of commodities is
Yeah.
still the same.
Yeah, and well, actually, I mean, in Syria, for example, it's the same situation. So, for example, people working for the government are now on about $20 a month.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we have price hikes in food and scarcity of food also, which is something that is, you know, never happened in the region.
Especially in Syria, because it's
Yeah,
self-sufficient, but
it's producing.
you
It's
have
a
some
producer. Yeah,
unwanted parasites sitting where
yeah.
the resources are.
Exactly. Exactly. So, you know, just I think it's good for people to really, it's hard to empathize with the situation here, but I think just to try and explain how people are trying to survive. And now, of course, it's Ramadan, so people, you know, need to provide even more food because families will basically join with families, and the man of the family, or the earner of the family, is feeding 2-3 families, right, during Ramadan. And then Eid is coming, where of course they then have to provide stuff for the kids and for the festivities and so on. It's huge pressure on the breadwinners in families right now, and you know, it's yeah, it's a very tough situation, despite some of the positive aspects of the geopolitical events that have been going on in the region for the last 2 or 3 weeks, including, of course, Saudi Arabia allegedly reopening its embassy in Syria after Eid. President Assad's meeting with the UAE, the Egyptian officials coming to Syria, although I would also add that Egypt knows perfectly well that it's in the crosshairs of both Israel and the West. So that's probably one good reason that it came to Damascus, to seek cooperation and alliance from that perspective also.
Definitely.
But what I wanted to do today was to focus on what's happening in Israel, because this entire situation seems to have sort of flared up. I wouldn't say out of nowhere, but obviously the catalyst for the massive protests that we're seeing are not Palestinian rights or the occupation of Palestinian territory or the brutality against the Palestinian people and the continued ethnic cleansing, of course. but it's following well, actually, I'm not sure if it's resignation or the sacking of the defense minister, right?
No, it started way before that. We are entering on week 16 of protests. So it's been months of protests, but they have been increasing dramatically over the past couple of weeks. But the issue is, let's just remind people what happened in the Zionist entity last year when there was an election, and actually there were two elections, and the third one had Netanyahu as prime minister because he lost in the second elections. That was in the first elections that happened, he lost. There was an opposition. There was Yair Lapid, and who is now the head leader of the opposition, that was prime minister, along with also Benny Gantz. They both interchanged prime minister for half the term each. And then after that, there was an election where Netanyahu lost, but then they repeated the elections over certain issues that are depending on the number of votes and a lot of issues, because Netanyahu didn't like the results. So they repeated the elections. But when they repeated the elections, Netanyahu had a coalition with a new set of extremists, because according to me, they are all extremists, but a new set of extremists that are way far more deadly and irrational than the current extremists, which were head by Yair Lapid. And we're talking about Smotrich and Ben Gvir. And these people, Ben Gvir was actually placed in jail because of extremism, because he attempted to kill an Israeli persona because of his views on the political issues inside of Israel. But the issue is farther than that, because when that coalition happened, it means that Netanyahu had to sell them something, give them something in order for them to give him votes. Added to that, some of the left that actually liked Netanyahu also voted for him. So when the cabinet was formed and the alliance was formed and the Knesset started convening to take to vote over laws and whatnot, the left that voted for Netanyahu realized that there are things happening that are being said and that are being done that they don't approve of. So they joined the already protests that were happening with the led by Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz, who are the opposition in the Zionist entity, or considered the left. But again, when I say left and right, please, they are all right for me. I am a Levantine, a Lebanese Southern woman. They are all left. They are all colonizers. They all should leave. But I'm just explaining what's going on.
Yeah.
So when that happened, and they just backed off from supporting Netanyahu, and they joined the protests. The issue that brought more people to the streets in the occupied Palestinian territories in Jaffa, Tel Aviv, was a proposal by Netanyahu's government that would allow a majority, I think like a 61 majority of the 120 seats inside the Knesset, to basically just override almost any Supreme Court ruling in the entity. And that would also allow politicians to appoint the justices, the judges, to the bench. So you can just imagine what can happen. And that was proposed by people like, for example, Yariv Levin, who is the justice minister in the entity, and by a religious Zionist La La Land man named Rothman. They both chair Knesset, the Knesset Law and Justice Committee, which is why they proposed this law. And it was spearheaded by Netanyahu, and it was obviously loved by Netanyahu, because there are a lot of corruption cases against Netanyahu and his entire family, even his wife. So Netanyahu would love to see the Supreme Court go, so he wouldn't go to jail the same way that Olmert went to jail, and this way he would help and appoint the judges that he would trust for them not to put him in jail. So both men who proposed this, they already had great hatred for the Supreme Court inside the Israeli entity, because it was that Supreme Court that it was actually that took the decision back in 2005 to withdraw from the Gaza Strip, to get out of the Gaza Strip. So it was because the Mizrahi population, which is basically the Jews that originate from the region of West Asia, whom the Supreme Court is usually, according to what they say, the Mizrahi say, the Supreme Court is usually biased against them. So these people did not want to leave Gaza. They wanted to stay there, and they want to keep killing the Palestinian people. So they already have a bad experience with, from their position, with the Supreme Court inside of the Israeli entity, which is a civil court. It's not a religious court. And what these two people want, what Rothman and also Levine want, they want for the Zionists who are ultra religious to take control of the Supreme Court, of the judicial system in general, inside the Zionist entity. So I mean, let's put it into perspective. Everyone that saw this happening, they were sure that these measures would help Netanyahu evade any sort of prosecution in all of his corruption cases, and it will just deny all they would drop the charges. They wouldn't even go to court. And add to that, which basically, if you remember Netanyahu's trial cases, they triggered more than 3 years, I think 3 or 4 years of political crisis inside of the entity, and there was a split inside of the entity that began. The real split began then. That led into the failure of the first and the second elections for Netanyahu. And within the power of the Supreme Court as well, because the people in the Supreme Court were who are, by the way, part of the political left of the opposition inside of Israel, they were talking against the full annexation of the occupied West Bank, which the right want to do it. They want to kill as much as they want of the Palestinian natives and drive them out of the West Bank and build illegal colonial settlers there. But the left wanted to just cut the cost and stop anything that's coming from the West Bank, because, you know, over the past 3 years, the West Bank has had a completely new maneuver in how to resist the occupation by adopting a full-fledged armed resistance that we had not seen since 2002. So the left wanted to end this politically, but the right wanted to go all in and just kill as much as possible. Yeah. Also, religiously speaking, the left is pro-LGBTQ legislation. They want to make it legal for same-sex people to get married inside of the entity. And that's a huge, big no for the religious Zionists. And they were trying to put some laws to protect women's rights, because what people don't know is that women have no rights in the far extreme Jewish religion. They keep, I mean, it's funny that people talk about Islamophobia. It's not the fact that it's absolutely nonsense. As a free Muslim, you know how free I am. I don't need to tell you. But they don't know that the far right extreme Zionist project is against women's rights, so and minority rights. Because if you haven't seen the video of one of the protesters getting his behind beaten so bad because he dared wave a Palestinian flag because he wants to help solve this issue politically, he was beaten up by the people who were protesting with him, not only the people protesting against him. Yeah. So yeah. It's a big controversial issue inside of the entity. So all of that amounted into what we saw. I think according to Khan TV, it was 750,000 people in the streets, colonial settlers in the streets of Jaffa, occupied Tel Aviv, in Palestine. And that's something that has never been seen. It's unprecedented in the history of this occupation entity. And that not only affected people, not only affected universities that are right now, they are on full strike. They not only affected council members who are now on a hunger strike. I think they stopped the hunger strike after Netanyahu said that he's backing down from from these reforms. I'll talk about it later. But not only that, it's also at the level of the army, the occupation forces. You have army pilots who refused to fly Netanyahu anywhere. You have army personnel, generals, who refuse to go back to their posts because they don't approve of the reforms that Netanyahu and his cult want to impose on the occupation settlers. And you have a conflicting struggle inside of the army itself, which is basically the only backbone holding what is known as Israel together, which is why that specific thing that happened right after Netanyahu dismissed the war minister of the entity. I don't want to say the wrong name, but I think his name is Yoav, if I'm not mistaken. But after he dismissed him, the people went out of their mind. The army just said, no, we are not going to take this. We had military reservists saying that we're not coming back. You had many allies of the Israeli entity itself across the world express alarm. I mean, the US, for the love of God, expressed concern over the direction in which the entity was heading. And you had their president, Isaac Herzog, saying time and again that if the house gets burned, it's going to fall on everyone's head. And after the dismissal of Yoav Gallant, his name is Gallant, Yoav Gallant, what they call the defense minister, what I call, and everyone who's sane calls the war minister, that appears to have changed the entire equation. Netanyahu fired Gallant over his opposition to the proposal. It sparked one of the most dramatic nights in Israeli history. You can see it in the thread that I started. It was so nice for me to write that. I was waiting for that for weeks, but it was every second there was a new thing coming up, and it was crazy. And although the media reported that Netanyahu will be willing to cut a deal, but he appeared to be basically a hostage in the hands, and it's because of him. He made that. He put himself in that position. He became, the media is now portraying Netanyahu as a hostage in the hands of the far right partners in his coalition, and they think that that would actually bring down the government. But and yet Netanyahu, instead of basically backing off and saying, okay, I'm going to stop the reforms, he said, I am now pausing the reforms. I'm going to wait till the new term of the Knesset. Until this term ends, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to wait till the upcoming term. That was unacceptable by both sides. His coalition said, no, we're not going to pause it. We're going to continue with it. And the people on the ground said, no, we don't believe you. And we don't want it to be paused. We want it to end right here and now. So no one trusts him from both sides right now. And other members of his coalition, they have just reiterated, they have emphasized their determination to pass the most important parts of this legislation before the Knesset breaks up by the Jewish Passover holiday, which is supposed to be on April 2nd, which is supposed to be next week. So we're going to see another week of craziness inside of the Zionist entity. And I've been told by Palestinian friends in the occupied 48 territories that they are afraid of one thing. They are very much glad that this is happening, because this shows the world what kind of crazy people are running the show in the Zionist entity, and how they are always, whether they are protesting or not, because over the past days, the number of people killed by the Zionist entity in the occupied West Bank increased. Even during that, they were still killing Palestinian people. But their main concern was that they know for sure that now the only option for Netanyahu would be to try to externalize the crisis, either starting something with the West Bank, or moving forward and starting something with Gaza, or even worse, picking on Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, look, if the latter happens, it would be the highlight of my life, because that would be spelling the end of the Zionist entity. But I'm so concerned and afraid that he will be forcing the army to externalize the problem into the Gaza Strip, the biggest open prison on earth. And the Palestinians are sick and tired, and we are sick and tired of watching them die without being able to do anything for them. So he might try to do this, but I don't know if it's going to work out. I don't know if some of the army members who disapprove of him will follow suit. But when it's about the Palestinians, all the Zionists are far-right extremists. I don't know if I've covered everything, but that's what I can remember from all the fuss that was happening. But the interesting thing is that clashes on the ground demanded in certain areas the authorities, the Zionist authorities, to take action against the protesters, beat them up, and arrest them, because everyone is armed to the teeth. All colonial settlers are armed to the teeth inside of occupied Palestine. So it's just going to take one bullet, hopefully, ya Rabb al-Alameen. It's just going to take one bullet for it to explode between them. And that's, I mean, obviously, if I put myself in their shoe, of course, it's not going to fit because I'm way bigger than them. But if I were to put myself in their shoe, it would be very, very concerning for the authorities, because any kind of loss of security and loss of grip inside of the entity will just be 0 hour for the Palestinian resistance to take control. That's what I'm hoping for. That's what they are concerned about. But basically, this is the craziness that has been happening so far.
Yeah, and I mean, it's extraordinary. I was reading something in Washington Post today that Biden's upcoming democracy summit, which is a joke in itself, kind of rescinded on its invitation to Netanyahu. And I think Netanyahu had pre-prepared or pre-recorded a speech to be given at the summit, which is now being withheld, right? Which I just find hilarious, really. But the thing is, I mean, a lot of people are commenting on the fact that, or they're stating that Netanyahu, although disliked by everyone, of course, he was, I'm repeating what they're saying, it's not my opinion, but that he was a good diplomat, that he was basically pretty moderate. But the fact is that Netanyahu's roots go back to Jabotinsky. He's a Jabotinsky follower, and of course Jabotinsky was effectively a revisionist Zionist and a collaborator with Simon Petlura, the first president of Ukraine. So for me, Netanyahu's election, let's say orchestrated election, came at the right time, because prior to his election, of course, Israel was hanging back on support for Ukraine, right? When Netanyahu came in, he came in on a campaign promise of supporting the protesters, which are also, of course, Western managed and orchestrated in Iran, and supplying arms to Ukraine. But what I find really interesting is that actually he's not really kind of followed through on either of those promises, right? It's largely been rhetoric. And in my view, Israel can't afford to supply weapons to Ukraine because, one, it's cornered. I mean, even Yemen has missiles trained on occupied cities, right? Inside occupied territories.
Palestine.
It's now got a region which is sort of uniting against the far right rhetoric. I mean, you had Smotrich, the finance minister, speaking in Paris and basically denying the existence of Palestinians, but also talking about the extension of Zionist power to Damascus and Jordan. So he's kind of pissed off. You know, both Jordan and UAE. UAE is talking about, or I think it was Jordan was talking about hate speech towards the Palestinians, but the UAE.
No, it was also it was the UAE and Saudi Arabia as well, and Jordan actually kicked out the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador.
Exactly. So, you know, in one fell swoop, really, I'm not surprised that Netanyahu has now shown his true colors, because I think he saw the opportunity in Ukraine to cut ties with Russia, because, you know, everyone talks about these close ties between Russia and Israel. But I think it was Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos that explained in his book, Arise Rossiya, that actually this is a bit of a myth, right? They are not close allies, but Russia has always played the role of negotiator, particularly in Syria, and to try and keep the peace between the neighbors of Syria that, of course, are constantly violating international law, aggressing against Syria, particularly Israel recently since the earthquake. Of course, we know has bombed at least 3 times
Aleppo and
civilian
Damascus,
areas, and Aleppo airport, which is the main humanitarian relief hub for more than 300,000 homeless people after the earthquake. But Turkey, the same. Turkey has annexed Syrian territory. It has funded the armed groups, including Al-Qaeda in various sort of splinter group nomenclature. So both countries, although Russia tried to maintain some kind of diplomatic relations with it, I wouldn't term them as close allies of Russia. I think that's been, something which has been maintained by certain sectors, particularly of independent media, but I don't think it's correct. And then I think Netanyahu saw Ukraine as an opportunity for him to pivot right and to follow through on the more extremist, revisionist, ethnic cleansing projects, right? This is my opinion.
Yep.
So I'm actually not surprised by what he did.
I'm not surprised either, but what I'm surprised by the surprise of certain Westerners, and by them not knowing that actually he's not the one who calls the shots. I mean, Israel is just a protege of the United States of America. I mean, the extreme Zionists who are running Israel are not even inside of Israel. They are in New York. They are in Washington. They're not in Israel. And you can see that because there in Washington and in New York and in the like basic European capitals, the level of protests and the level of disapproval of him to go there. And I mean, he canceled his trip to Germany because of the protests to Germany. Netanyahu canceled his trip to Germany because of the protests. So the issue is people don't understand then when it's strategic, it's not in the hands of what is known as Israel. It's in the hands of the empire. And the empire right now is not happy with Netanyahu. They know how much corrupt he is, and they know the level of basically problems that he has inflicted his own coalition and his own self in. And this and I'll be very blunt about the fact that I understand that the Biden administration is just so sick of him, especially after the stunt that he pulled with Trump for the deal of the century, and with him just overriding everything that was happening during the Obama administration. If you remember, there was a big hostility between Obama and Netanyahu because of that specific issue, and Obama didn't want to see that happen in his term. So they also don't like Netanyahu for that issue because he was just winging it on his own. And add to that, things are changing fast because of the war on Russia, because of the people keep saying it's the war on Ukraine. No, I'm sorry. It's actually a global war on Russia, using Ukraine, sadly, using Ukraine and the Ukrainian people as basically a tool to try and make Russia submissive to the Western ideology and the Western demands. And you have a couple of puppets like Zelensky and his friends who are running, who think they are running the show. They're just running the actual broadcast show, what we see on TV. But Ukraine has turned into another Israel for the Western world, and they are trying so hard not to allow that to spill over into Europe, but they are very much mistaken. It will spill over into Europe if they continue with that rhetoric against Russia, because I mean, no country on the earth would accept the provocation that Russia accepted and tolerated for more than 10 years because of NATO. But at the same time, the world, because of that, the world is changing dramatically, and it's changing fast. And the first result of that change was seen in both Africa and in the West Asia, what's known as the Middle East. In Africa, with you having major African countries basically just spelling out their allegiance to Russia and saying that they stand with Russia, because Russia has been writing off their debt. Russia has been helping them with technology. Russia has been helping them with food security. Of course, they're going to stand with Russia. And at the same time, you have the West Asian changes. When would you have ever imagined that Iran and Saudi Arabia would be sitting at the same table? So there you go. And there is now a lot of talk about Mohammed bin Salman moving towards, hopefully, inshallah, a political solution in Yemen, because we need this absurd adventure to stop in Yemen. And you have the UAE returning to Syria. You have Saudi Arabia Liberia turning to Syria. You have Egypt also sending love letters to President Bashar Assad. Jordan was the first Arab country alongside with Lebanon, but Jordan was the first country to open the borders and for the king to hold that phone and call President Bashar himself after the major catastrophic earthquake. So changes are happening. They're happening fast. And now, on a daily basis, we have the Syrian National Defense Forces bombing US bases, illegal US bases inside of Syria, which is music to my ears. So you have all of that, and you see this small entity in itself fighting within itself, and then looking around and seeing everything changing. If I were them, I would be scared.
Exactly. And I mean, this is the other point that I wanted to make. I mean, Israel now is facing, for example, you talked about an external war, the fact that it might contain that war as being against Gaza, but that if it spills out, I mean, if, for example, there have been provocations, haven't there, on the border with Lebanon?
Yes, especially in the past month.
Yeah. But if this war spills out against Hezbollah, this is not the Hezbollah of 2006. This is a fully fledged, well-trained and
this is not even
army.
Hezbollah.
No,
it's not even Hezbollah. It is the axis of resistance.
Yes, exactly.
It is missiles that will be flying from Iraq to Jaffa. It will be missiles flying from Sana'a into Jaffa. It will be missiles flying from the Golan, the liberated part, into Jaffa. So it's not just Lebanon. And it's a game changer. It's something that would literally make the prophecy of Israel never reaching 80 years an actual truth. And it will rid once and for all the region from this cancerous entity that has been here living on the expense of the Palestinian people. But if you look at what's going on inside of the Israel entity, you could see that if the axis of resistance does nothing except just watch and have a couple of I'm not going to say beers because it's haram, I'm going to say like a couple of cup of teas with some popcorn and just watch it, it is burning its own self alive. And I think that the Palestinian people and Palestinian resistance is fully capable of doing that, which is basically removing the last foundation from underneath the Zionist entity's feet. And we've seen it in the heroic operations that the Lion's Den and the Jenin brigades and the Nablus brigades are doing, alongside, obviously, with the precious diamonds coming from Gaza, the missiles, which are the only way that the Gazans tell the world. Because if you watch how the media operates, Gaza is not even on the map unless Gaza is actually retaliating with missiles. It's not there. No one talks about it. No one even speaks about it. No one even speaks not only about Israel, about Egypt, the Egyptian role in suffocating the people of Gaza. So it's not there unless it's firing back. So they know that they have the power to fire back, and they know that they have the power to coordinate, not only with the West Bank, but also with the Palestinians living inside the 1948 territories. If you remember, in 2021, we had a 3-day economic strike inside of the interior Palestinian 1948 territories, and that 3-day economic strike stopped Israel because it's Palestinians who are working. It's Palestinians who are the workers who actually maintain the economy inside of that entity. So they just said no for 3 days, and they shut down their stores. Yes, Israel was had a very hard fist against them. It ended up arresting many and shutting down the businesses of many more. But when there are that many, they're not going to be able to be against them all. So there is power in the hands of the Palestinians, and I think they know that they have the back of the axis, that the axis of resistance actually have their backs, and they know at the same time that what's going on by itself is a leverage for the Palestinian people. So let's just see what happens, and let's just hope that Mahmoud Abbas remains silent, doesn't say something stupid until then, and hopefully it works for the best. But it's definitely accelerating, definitely.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we talk about the unity of the resistance, and that's something that has been growing. I mean, for example, we even had the visit of Hamas to Damascus,
Syria.
And, yeah, and then almost immediately afterwards, we started to see Syrian flags in Jenin and Nablus during some of the clashes, right, which is extraordinary. And so
Yeah.
I think, do you think that this is what is terrifying the managers of the Zionist entity right now, is that they're actually saying, because we know that the UAE acted outside the influence of the US and the UK, even though they have, the US and the UK, massive intelligence cells actually on UAE territory. And yet President Assad, his plane was escorted by UAE warplanes that, as Kivok Al-Masyan pointed out, were probably manufactured in the US. You know, so this is an absolutely extraordinary. What is causing this? Is it that these countries like Saudi Arabia, like UAE, are looking at the West and seeing nothing but instability? I mean, even the protests in France, they're calling for Putin to come and rescue them from the authoritarian regime. I mean, and they're seeing
Like,
Katyusha in the streets. I mean, this is just extraordinary what's going on, you know?
I know. It's look, the issue is all across the world, there are always people who are awake, and they know, they realize that everything that their government says is not true. And in the Arabian Peninsula, in specific, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, these states, they know that they have power. We know that they have power because they have massive amounts of resources. They know they'd have that. And believe it or not, they don't like to be dictated around. They don't. But they didn't have the power because they knew that the United States of America would just include them in the list of countries that the so-called Arab Spring will be hitting, because it's very easy to remove such dictatorships, the likes of Mohammed bin Zayed and Mohammed bin Salman and the Kuwaiti also royal family. It is very easy to remove them because it is a dictatorship. It is against minorities. It is suffocating the people. It is something that has nothing to do with what the peoples aspire to for freedom of expression and freedom of religion and freedom of basically taking part of having the freedom to take part in the political process in their countries. They know that, which is why if you are a citizen of these countries, you're supposed to be living a better life than other people. But that's not the case inside of Saudi Arabia. That's the case of Dubai, of UAE in general, and the case of Kuwait. The Kuwaitis and the Qataris and the Bahrainis, they live very lavishly because the government allows them to. The government doesn't even take taxes from them because they don't want them to rise against them. But now, fast forward to this era where the Arabian Peninsula is looking around and seeing how fast the world is changing and how dramatically the US is losing its influence in West Asia, and how itself is in a deep financial and political crisis, and how Europe has just sunk into the hands of the United States in ways that they would have never imagined. They are now just literally puppets in the hands of the US with the war that's going on between Russia and Ukraine. And they have looked around and they have seen that the axis of resistance, because of the coordination and because of their immense commitment to their own people, to their own societies, they have been able to move forward, advance, develop, and have great relationship with Russia, with China, with Turkey, with Pakistan, for example. These are the major Islamic states as well. And at the same time, they've seen that the enemy that has always been instigated as an enemy, pushed to be an enemy by the US, basically the Islamic Republic of Iran, they know that Iran has never really attacked them. They know that Iran doesn't really, in real time, in real effort, does not care about changing the regimes in the Arabian Peninsula. Iran just wants to be left alone. Iran wants to have good relationship with everyone, and Iran wants Palestine to be free. I'm not saying that Arabs don't. I'm not saying that the Arabian Peninsula regimes don't, but they didn't have the say in it. They didn't have the decision. They were clumped in the hands of the United States of America. They were being pushed by the US to buy weapons against their own will. They were pushed to have the same price of oil for more than 35 or 40 years so far. So now they've seen everything that's changing, and they see that there's a giant living in the eastern part of the map, known as China, that is ready to invest, to pay a lot of money with no demands made. They just want to have bilateral economic relations, and they don't want to dictate any political issues. They don't want to dictate any military issues. And they were like, we can actually have good relations, have good economy, have peace, and not have our necks basically cut by any Western regime. And they like that. And that explains what's going on. And that also explains how the United Arab Emirates, I mean, the same guy whom in 2012, who is currently the foreign minister of the UAE, the same guy, he has a video, you can find it on YouTube, sitting in the Arab League and saying it's about time we get rid of the regime inside of Damascus, the brutal regime, the whatever that's being said. That same guy was the first man to land in Damascus and shake the hand of President Bashar al-Assad. And then send more than 42, if I'm not mistaken, planes of aid to Syria after the catastrophe, and then welcome President Assad in his first ever official visit with his wife, the First Lady, to the United Arab Emirates, where when he landed, President Assad was basically engulfed by no less than 10 US military bases. Exactly. And he did it because, I mean, that image was the image of a victorious man, a man who just won a global brutal war, not only against him, but against his allies as well in the region. So that image just speaks louder than anything that the Biden administration can say, louder than anything that any remaining remnants of the Al-Qaeda in the Arab world can say. And I think the biggest punch in the face for those people and for the Western regimes as well will be the visit of the Saudi foreign minister after Eid to Damascus. And I mean, you could just look at the speeches of Mohammed bin Salman, how they have been changing dramatically over the past couple of months, and how he's just moving away from, I mean, we all know about the feud between him and the Biden administration itself. But I mean, even on the inside, how he has been basically cracking down on the judicial system inside of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, who were, by the way, his loyal puppets. Yeah. But he's cracking down on them because it's that judicial system that actually rules the very conservative community inside of Saudi Arabia, because, you know, he's opening up. He wants to show that Saudi Arabia is moving towards entertainment and allowing concerts and allowing women to drive and allowing all of these issues that are liberal westernized issues that the Saudi Arabian population is not used to, and he knows that if he doesn't get rid of those people in power, despite the fact that actually it's illegal and I don't condone it, but at the same time they were not really that nice of judges, but he knows that if he doesn't get rid of them, they can and they have the power to mobilize the people against him, and he can lose the power. So he's been changing a lot of things internally. Now he's moving to change things in the region. And even though we saw him donate 400 million US dollars that would have been better off being paid to his Arab brothers and sisters instead of being sent to Ukraine, but it's some sort of what is known in the Arab world as Sha'arat Muawiyah, which literally translates into the hairline of Muawiyah, because Muawiyah, he's a historic Islamic personality who was great in politics. So he's trying not to break that hairline with the West. But at the same time, I mean, 400 million in Ukraine, but 10 billion plus for China, 100 billion plus for economic development with China. So we all know where the actual balance is going. So it is changing. It is changing fast. It is changing for the better, definitely for everyone. But at the same time, the financial crisis in the United States and the West in general is also holding hostage everyone with it.
Yeah.
especially countries that are relying on, they're pegging their economy to the US dollar. So we might also see changes in that direction, which explains the Chinese mediation for the Iranian Saudi detente, because in my opinion, it's more about the BRICS than it is actually about the region. Because in order to bring those giant oil productive countries into the BRICS, they should not have any conflict between them, especially political or military conflict. So it starts there, but it will definitely have a very, very positive effect on the region. And trust me, I'm a very vocal supporter of the axis of resistance, and I'm very vocal against Mohammed bin Salman and his regime. But I am all in for any sort of détente, rapprochement, or talks that would end all hostilities. We really want peace with everyone, especially in the Arab world, but not on the expense of the Palestinian people, not at the expense of having relations with Israel, not at all.
Yeah, exactly. Marwa, thank you so much for clarifying a huge amount of what's going on for
My
everyone
pleasure,
who's
Habib.
listening in. And please continue doing so. Hope to catch up with you again when even more developments have taken place. It's moving so
I'm
fast.
sure we're gonna be talking again soon, because things are changing faster than
Exactly.
we can actually like grasp it.
I know. I'm struggling to write about things. I'm finding it like it's all moving too fast.
Yeah.
And it's easier just to keep talking at the moment. But thank you for
Yeah.
informing people.
My pleasure.
And please take care of yourself.
Thank you, and Ramadan Mubarak for everyone, and happy Easter for everyone who's going to be celebrating next week and the week after, and in hopes for a better future for the people of West Asia. And keep up the protests in France. We support you.
Absolutely, definitely. All right, take care, Marwa, and speak to you very
Thank you,
soon.
Habibti.
Bye bye.
Inshallah. Bye bye.